Mary Pickford. Mary Pickford wasn't just America's sweetheart. She was the first actress to turn fame into financial power. By the mid-1920s, she wasn't just starring in films. She was co-owning the studio that made them. With Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, and D.W. Griffith, Pickford co-founded United Artists, a radical move that gave her creative and financial control. Her savvy negotiations earned her percentages of film profits, not just flat salaries. At one point, she was earning $10,000 per week, equal to over $150,000 today, and had profit participation in nearly every film she starred in. She also owned her own production company and held stock in United Artists, which continued paying dividends long after she stopped acting. Pickford invested heavily in Los Angeles real estate and had a stake in early television. But unlike some flashy contemporaries, she managed her wealth with quiet precision. Her legendary Beverly Hills estate, Pickfair, was one of the first true Hollywood mansions, a 22-room symbol of her clout. She donated generously to children's hospitals and film preservation causes, but she kept a tight circle and guarded her assets. By the time of her death in 1979, her estate was valued in the tens of millions, a figure that, adjusted for inflation, easily surpasses $100 million. Pickford wasn't just rich, she was revolutionary. She redefined what a woman in Hollywood could own, control, and leave behind. Charlie Chaplin. Few names are as globally recognized as Charlie Chaplin, and even fewer actors from his era became as staggeringly wealthy. By the 1920s, Chaplin wasn't just making movies. He was one of the richest men in America. Chaplin's genius wasn't just comedic, it was business. Like Mary Pickford, he co-founded United Artists to gain control over his own distribution. He directed, wrote, acted in, and scored his own films, keeping the lion's share of profits. His earnings soared into the millions, especially with blockbusters like The Kid, City Lights, and Modern Times. In 1918, he signed what was then the largest contract ever offered to an entertainer, $1 million for 8 films. He also invested his earnings wisely, pouring money into real estate in Beverly Hills and Swiss properties after his exile from the U.S. By the 1950s, Chaplin lived in a sprawling mansion in Vevey, Switzerland, surrounded by wealth but distanced from Hollywood's chaos. His estate included rare manuscripts, paintings, and business holdings that continued generating income long after he stopped making films. Chaplin's financial legacy endured beyond his death in 1977. His family has continued to benefit from royalties, licensing, and museum exhibitions tied to his iconic image. He wasn't just the face of silent cinema, he was a master of turning art into enduring wealth. Bob Hope. Bob Hope may be remembered for his sharp one-liners and USO tours, but behind the wisecracks was one of Hollywood's savviest real estate investors. At the height of his career, Hope was worth over $500 million, largely from properties, not just movies. Hope never relied on showbiz money alone. In the 1930s, while others spent lavishly, he quietly began buying land. By the 1960s, he owned prime plots all over Southern California, including large swaths of what became the San Fernando Valley. He bought golf courses, office buildings, and entire neighborhoods before they were even developed. Though he was one of America's highest-paid entertainers, pulling in millions from radio, film, and TV, his real estate earnings dwarfed his showbiz checks. He reportedly owned more than 10,000 acres of land at one point. Unlike others, Hope never flaunted his wealth. He continued performing well into his 80s, traveling the world and giving generously to veterans' hospitals and humanitarian causes. Even in death, his fortune remained impressive. His Toluca Lake estate alone was valued at $27 million. Bob Hope laughed all the way to the bank, but he earned every penny with shrewdness few comedians ever matched. Howard Hughes. While he began as a film producer and actor, Howard Hughes transcended Hollywood to become one of the richest and most enigmatic men in American history. His wealth was staggering, but his path to it was stranger than fiction. Born into wealth from his father's oil drill bit company, Hughes inherited a fortune before he was 20. He moved to Hollywood and began producing films like Hell's Angels and Scarface, investing millions of his own money into pushing the boundaries of filmmaking. His films were expensive, but they made headlines and money. By the late 1930s, Hughes was also investing heavily in aviation, buying controlling stakes in TWA and developing military aircraft. While Hollywood made him famous, aviation and defense contracts made him a billionaire. He dated starlets, bought studios, and lived in penthouse hotels, but eventually descended into reclusive madness. His later years were defined by paranoia and seclusion, but his empire, spanning airlines, casinos, and motion pictures, continued raking in profits. When Hughes died in 1976, he left behind an estate valued at over $1.5 billion. His financial empire was so vast and tangled it took years to sort out. Howard Hughes wasn't just rich. He was an American legend who lived and died surrounded by myth and money. Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire danced his way into the hearts of millions, but he also tap danced straight into multimillionaire status. While his performances seemed weightless, Astaire's financial strategies were grounded in reality. By the time he died in 1987, his fortune exceeded $20 million, a staggering sum for someone who never chased blockbuster paychecks. Astaire's wealth came from smart contract negotiations, television deals, and, most notably, stocks and real estate. He was one of the first Golden Age stars to understand the importance of residuals, ensuring that his classic musical performances would continue earning for decades. Astaire also owned partial rights to many of his early RKO films and was paid handsomely for his TV specials in the 1950s and 60s. Yet what truly set him apart was his savvy investment in horse racing and real estate. He co-owned breeding farms and multiple properties across Beverly Hills and Palm Springs. Despite his fortune, Astaire was modest. He avoided the loud opulence of some contemporaries and lived a relatively low-profile life. When he passed away, he left a meticulously managed estate for his children, along with instructions to avoid turning his legacy into a brand. Fred Astaire didn't just master the rhythm of the stage, he mastered the rhythm of wealth, dancing with grace between fame and fortune. Bing Crosby. Before Elvis, before the Beatles, there was Bing Crosby, one of the first multimedia superstars and one of Hollywood's richest men. By the 1950s, Crosby was pulling in $100,000 a week from radio, movies, and record sales. But he wasn't just a performer, he was an empire. Crosby's voice defined an era, and White Christmas became the best-selling single of all time, earning residuals for decades. He also starred in box office smashes like Going My Way and The Road to films, often negotiating a cut of the profits instead of just salary. But Crosby's real financial genius came from diversification. He invested early in Ampex, the company that introduced magnetic tape recording in the U.S., changing the face of audio forever. He was also a part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team and had extensive real estate holdings in California and Nevada. He founded Bing Crosby Enterprises, managing ventures from TV production to cattle ranches. At his peak, his net worth exceeded $50 million, an astronomical figure for the time. Crosby was both a businessman and a family man, though his personal life was at times tumultuous. He died in 1977 while golfing in Spain, leaving behind not only a rich musical legacy, but one of the most impressive private fortunes in Golden Age history. Clark Gable. Clark Gable wasn't just the king of Hollywood, he was also a king of smart financial choices. Though he never obsessed over wealth publicly, he quietly built one of the most secure fortunes in Tinseltown. At the time of his death in 1960, his estate was valued at over $10 million, worth well over $100 million today. Gable's stardom exploded with Gone with the Wind, for which he earned a then astronomical salary. But what set him apart was that he demanded back-end percentages from MGM, giving him a share of profits. Few actors at the time had such foresight. He was also frugal. Gable lived comfortably but without excess. He bought land in the San Fernando Valley when it was still farmland, later selling parcels for millions. His 20-acre ranch was not just a retreat, it was a sound investment. During World War II, he served as a combat pilot, pausing his career and refusing pay. But upon return, he was still in demand. Rather than chasing every role, he selected scripts that paid top dollar and negotiated wisely. Even off-screen, Gable held stock in aircraft companies, cattle ventures, and even a small oil interest. He understood how to grow wealth while protecting it. Clark Gable may have played reckless rogues, but when it came to money, he was as grounded as they come, rich in spirit and in assets. Gene Autry. Known as the singing cowboy, Gene Autry was a country music pioneer, television star, film icon, and one of the richest entertainers in America. But unlike others on this list, Autry didn't just amass a fortune, he built an empire. At his peak in the 1940s, Autry was everywhere. He starred in over 90 films, hosted a long-running radio show, and sold millions of records. But he took his earnings and invested in things most actors ignored: radio stations, TV affiliates, oil drilling, cattle farms, and sports franchises. He founded Golden West Broadcasters, which became one of the most successful media empires on the West Coast. In 1961, Autry became the original owner of the Los Angeles Angels baseball team, a stake that made him hundreds of millions as the franchise value exploded. Gene Autry was never content with just fame. He studied business, surrounded himself with financial advisors, and turned his cowboy charm into cold, hard assets. By the time of his death in 1998, his estate was valued at over $320 million. He was a man who sang about tumbleweeds but retired owning skyscrapers. Gene Autry rode off into the sunset not just as a legend, but as a financial powerhouse. Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball didn't just make America laugh. She quietly built one of the largest fortunes in television history. Best known for I Love Lucy, Ball was more than a comedic genius. She was a business titan. Her wealth at the time of her death in 1989 was estimated at over $40 million, but the legacy she left behind was worth hundreds of millions more. Ball became the first woman to head a major television production company, Desilu Productions. Alongside her then-husband, Desi Arnaz, she didn't just star in I Love Lucy, she owned it. That control meant profits, reruns, and syndication checks for decades. She understood early that owning content was far more powerful than just performing in it. After her divorce from Desi in 1960, Lucy bought out his shares in Desilu and became the sole owner. Under her leadership, Desilu produced legendary shows like Star Trek, Mission, Impossible, and The Untouchables. She later sold the studio to Paramount Television for $17 million, more than $140 million in today's dollars. Ball also invested heavily in real estate, owning multiple homes in Beverly Hills and Palm Springs. She lived well, but she worked harder than most in Hollywood. Every dollar she earned was self-made, a result of grit, vision, and timing. Lucille Ball wasn't just the queen of sitcoms. She was a financial trailblazer who turned punchlines into power and reruns into riches. John Wayne. John Wayne was the embodiment of rugged American masculinity, but off-screen, he was a disciplined investor with a clear vision for wealth. Nicknamed Duke, Wayne starred in over 170 films and was consistently one of the top box office draws from the 1940s through the 1960s. But Wayne's real genius was in ownership. He negotiated deals that gave him portions of his film's profits, most notably with the Alamo and the Green Berets, both of which he also produced. He even formed his own production company, Batjack Productions, to retain creative and financial control. His wealth wasn't just movie money. Wayne invested heavily in oil, cattle, and Southern California real estate. In the 1950s, he bought undeveloped land in Newport Beach, including what would become the prestigious neighborhood of Bay Shores. His oceanfront mansion alone became worth tens of millions. Despite his macho persona, Wayne was meticulous with finances. He hired a team of advisors, diversified his investments, and shielded his assets from Hollywood's boom and bust cycles. At his peak, his net worth exceeded $50 million. When he passed away in 1979, he left behind not just an iconic film legacy, but an estate that continued generating revenue through licensing, merchandise, and film royalties. John Wayne didn't just act like a legend, he banked like one. Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart's aw-shucks charm may have made him seem like your favorite next-door neighbor, but beneath the modest exterior was a man with nerves of steel when it came to money. Stewart was not only a top-grossing star of the 1940s and 1950s, but also one of the first major actors to demand profit sharing instead of a flat salary. When Stewart signed on for Winchester 73, he took a gamble, agreeing to receive a percentage of the box office rather than upfront cash. The gamble paid off enormously and forever changed the way Hollywood paid its biggest stars. He repeated the same strategy with other films, including Rear Window and The Glenn Miller Story, raking in millions. Stewart also held stock in multiple aviation companies and was a decorated military pilot during World War II, later consulting on aircraft deals for government contracts. Though he never flashed his money, Stewart was extremely savvy. He had a diversified investment portfolio in real estate across California. He also lived relatively simply in Beverly Hills and drove his beloved old car long after he could have afforded a fleet of Rolls-Royces. At the time of his death in 1997, Stewart's estate was valued at over $30 million. More importantly, he left behind a legacy of smart business practices that inspired younger generations of actors to take control of their careers. Jimmy Stewart's secret weapon wasn't just his voice, it was his vision. William Holden. William Holden may have won an Oscar for Stalag 17 and captivated audiences in Sunset Boulevard and Bridge on the River Kwai. But it was his off-screen ventures that truly cemented his wealth. By the 1970s, Holden was earning upwards of $1 million per film, and he put that money to work in unusual places. Unlike most Hollywood millionaires, Holden's heart and money went into conservation. He bought a vast wildlife preserve in Kenya called Mount Kenya Game Ranch and poured millions into wildlife protection, education, and ecotourism. He co-founded the Mount Kenya Wildlife Conservancy, a nonprofit that still survives to this day. Back in the U.S., Holden had homes in Palm Springs, Switzerland, and California, and invested in stocks, wine businesses, and international real estate. He was also one of the earliest major actors to support ecological and humanitarian efforts with substantial financial backing. Though known for his drinking and personal demons, Holden was deeply committed to using his wealth for good. At the time of his death in 1981, his estate was valued at approximately $20 million, with portions allocated to environmental charities. Holden may have been a reluctant celebrity, but he was a purposeful investor and one of the few who turned Hollywood gold into real-world impact. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was more than just beauty and diamonds. She was a one-woman brand before the term even existed. Known for her violet eyes, scandalous romances, and legendary roles, Taylor was also one of the wealthiest actresses of the 20th century. At the time of her death in 2011, her estate was estimated at $600 million. Her acting career began at age 10, and by her 20s, she was already commanding $1 million per film, a groundbreaking fee at the time. But her true financial transformation came from merchandising and business savvy. Taylor capitalized on her fame by launching her own perfume line, White Diamonds, in 1991. The fragrance became one of the most successful celebrity perfumes in history, generating over $1 billion in sales over the years. Taylor was also a serious collector of art and jewelry. Her personal collection, featuring pieces from Cartier, Bulgari, and Van Cleef and Arpels, was so vast that after her death, Christie's held an auction that fetched nearly $145 million. One diamond alone sold for $8.8 million. She invested in real estate too, owning luxury homes in Bel Air, London, and Switzerland. Despite her opulent lifestyle, Taylor was fiercely charitable, raising millions for AIDS research long before it was a popular cause in Hollywood. Elizabeth Taylor didn't just break hearts. She broke records, living as one of the richest and most fearless women in entertainment history. Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx, the iconic leader of the Marx Brothers, was known for his razor-sharp wit and satirical brilliance. But behind the grease paint mustache and wisecracks was a man with a deep understanding of money, investments, and self-worth. While his early vaudeville earnings were modest, Groucho's fortunes changed with the brothers' move into films. Hits like Duck Soup and A Night at the Opera made him a household name. However, the bulk of his wealth came after his film career, during his successful transition to radio and television. He hosted the wildly popular game show You Bet Your Life, earning him a steady income for over a decade. Marx was also an avid stock market investor. Unlike many of his contemporaries who lost money during the Great Depression, Groucho made strategic investments that grew exponentially by the 1950s and 60s. He also owned prime real estate in Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, which skyrocketed in value. Though he was famously frugal and loved to joke about money, Groucho's estate was valued in the millions when he died in 1977. He left behind a legacy of laughter, but also one of financial foresight. He once quipped, "While money can't buy happiness, it certainly lets you choose your own form of misery." Groucho chose wisely. George Burns. George Burns lived to be 100, and he made sure his money lasted just as long. Known for his dry humor, cigar in hand, and perfect comedic timing, Burns built a career that spanned vaudeville, radio, film, and television. But his success wasn't just artistic, it was financial. Alongside his wife and comedic partner Gracie Allen, Burns built one of the most enduring brands in early television with the George Burns and Gracie Allen Show, which ran for 8 seasons. Burns understood syndication, profit sharing, and smart advertising deals long before they were common. He turned his show into a money-making machine that kept paying out long after the final curtain. After Gracie's retirement, Burns continued acting and performing into his 90s, winning an Oscar for The Sunshine Boys and earning millions with a string of "Oh God" films. He also invested heavily in blue-chip stocks and real estate, maintaining a diverse portfolio that gave him financial security in every decade of his life. At the time of his death in 1996, Burns's estate was estimated at over $30 million. But he remained modest, loyal to old friends, and famously carried a contract that allowed him to perform on his 100th birthday, which he honored. George Burns wasn't just a survivor. He was a strategic performer who laughed all the way to the bank and stayed there for a century. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis started with nothing, just a poor Jewish kid from the Bronx. But by the time he passed away in 2010, he had built a fortune exceeding $50 million. With matinee idol looks and a hustler's mindset, Curtis rose through the ranks of 1950s Hollywood with sheer ambition and never looked back. Curtis became a household name thanks to hits like Some Like It Hot, The Defiant Ones, and Spartacus, negotiating strong salaries and later profit shares. But it was his post-acting ventures that truly expanded his fortune. He reinvented himself as a serious painter in the 1980s and 1990s. His artwork sold internationally, earning him millions and making him one of the few actors to successfully transition into the high-end art world. His vibrant, abstract pieces were exhibited in galleries from Los Angeles to London. Curtis also invested in collectibles, particularly fine art, rare books, and memorabilia. He held real estate in Nevada and Palm Springs, and his disciplined financial planning allowed him to avoid the common trap of old-age financial ruin that claimed many of his peers. Despite his personal struggles, failed marriages, addiction battles, Curtis never let his money slip away. He was generous with charities, particularly those benefiting children and veterans. Tony Curtis lived big, painted bold, and left behind not just reels of classic cinema, but a fortune built from talent and tenacity. James Kagny. James Kagny played violent mobsters and streetwise rebels on screen, but in real life, he was a soft-spoken family man with a passion for financial security. He didn't trust Hollywood's excess, and while he became a top earner at Warner Brothers, Kagny's real genius lay in what he didn't spend. Kagny was one of the first major stars to fight for fair compensation. He took Warner Brothers to court in the 1930s over contract disputes and won. That landmark case set new financial standards for actors and gave him greater creative control. His new deals included bonuses, percentages, and creative rights that turned into serious cash over time. By the 1940s, Kagny was investing in real estate and farming. He bought a 100-acre farm in New York and a ranch in California, where he raised horses and lived far from the Hollywood chaos. He also diversified into blue-chip stocks and government bonds. While other stars flashed diamonds, Kagny lived a modest life. His avoidance of luxury spending meant his money grew steadily. He also avoided scandal, investing quietly and securely, eventually amassing a fortune valued at more than $20 million by the time of his death in 1986. James Kagny may have yelled on screen, but off-screen, he let his investments speak for him. He was proof that even gangsters could retire rich, at least in the movies. Danny Kaye. Danny Kaye's comic timing and rubbery face made him a Hollywood favorite in the 1940s and 1950s, but his career didn't end with laughter. Behind the scenes, Kaye was a shrewd investor, successful businessman, and global humanitarian. Best known for The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, White Christmas, and his variety shows, Kaye's entertainment contracts were well-structured, including royalties, overseas distribution, and music rights. His television earnings alone brought in millions during the early days of network broadcasting. Kaye wasn't content with showbiz success. He co-founded Pacific Airlines, becoming one of the few celebrities of his era to venture into aviation. He also held shares in restaurants, hotels, and production companies. His savvy allowed him to fund various global humanitarian missions with UNICEF, where he served as a roving ambassador. He lived comfortably, but not excessively, and his Beverly Hills estate housed both luxury and simplicity. In his later years, he earned millions from voice work, endorsements, and smart syndication deals. By the time of his death in 1987, Danny Kaye's estate was estimated at $25 to $30 million. He was one of Hollywood's rare stars who made people laugh and made his money last. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn was once one of Hollywood's highest-paid stars, but he also serves as a cautionary tale. In the 1930s and 40s, Flynn pulled in as much as $250,000 per film, a colossal figure for the time. At his peak, he was richer than many moguls, earning today's equivalent of tens of millions. But while Flynn had the earning power of a titan, his spending habits were legendary. Yachts, exotic travel, multiple homes, alcohol, court cases, and failed business ventures drained his accounts. Still, there were moments of financial brilliance. He invested in land in Jamaica and tried launching a film studio in Cuba. Both bold moves, though neither turned major profits. Despite his impulsive lifestyle, Flynn kept income flowing through autobiography deals, late-stage film appearances, and syndication of his earlier work. His book, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, was a bestseller and brought in hefty royalties. At the time of his death in 1959, his estate was reportedly in debt, but had he followed a different path, Flynn could have rivaled the wealth of Chaplan or Hope. His story is both dazzling and tragic. A man who touched unimaginable wealth, but never truly held on to it. Errol Flynn reminds us that making millions is one thing, keeping them is another. Hedi Lamar. Hedi Lamar was dubbed the most beautiful woman in the world, but her true brilliance lay far beyond the screen. Though she dazzled in Samson and Delilah, Algiers and Boomtown, Lamar was also an inventor, holding a patent that would become the foundation for modern Wi-Fi, GPS, and Bluetooth. In the 1940s, alongside composer George Antheil, Lamar co-invented a frequency-hopping technology originally designed to help Allied torpedoes avoid jamming. Though the military didn't implement it at the time, the patent later proved invaluable in telecommunications. Lamar never received direct profits from the invention. Her patent expired before technology caught up. But she made substantial money from acting, endorsements, and appearances. At the height of her career, she was earning $5,000 per week and negotiated profit-sharing deals rare for female stars at the time. Later in life, Lamar invested in real estate and art, securing a multi-million-dollar fortune. Though she became reclusive in her final decades, her finances remained stable thanks to royalties, smart tax planning, and rights to her image. When she passed away in 2000, she left behind a modest but secure estate, bolstered by a resurgent interest in her contributions to science and film. Today, she's honored not only as a screen siren, but a tech pioneer. Hedi Lamar wasn't just rich, she was revolutionary. She cracked the code on beauty, brains, and financial endurance. These Golden Age icons weren't just actors, they were architects of their own empires. From perfume empires to pioneering production deals, they turned fame into fortune on their own terms. Their stories remind us that in old Hollywood, the richest roles weren't always on screen, they were behind the scenes.